Well, 2022 is about over, and with that comes a time for reflection. But in that reflection, I think we could agree that Cyberpunk 2077 modding had its best year ever. We get so many incredible and interesting mods this year, and even some official mod tools from CDPR. And I think the best part about all of this is, I bet 2023 will be an even better year for Cyberpunk modding. We're definitely on an upward trajectory here with some awesome things on the horizon. But with that in mind, let's first take a look at my number 10 mod with Dilation Overhaul. This is easily one of the best mods to come to Cyberpunk 2077 just ever, and what it's going to do is fundamentally rework how time dilation works in game. There'll be some general changes to time dilation. There's going to be some bug fixes for that slow time cyberware, some new features like the ability to slow time while driving a car, which can yield some pretty awesome and wild results, or what at points can be terrifying when you trigger a time dilation. If an enemy has their own time dilation cyberware, they can move at a regular or even faster speed. So all of a sudden this enemy will just pop up on you, moving even quicker than you because they have better or higher tier cyberware. Although the real meat and potatoes of this mod are the plethora of reworked and newly added Sandevistan options to play with. There are going to be some general options here that will slow time moderately and give you some bonuses like to melee damage or crit damage. Another that's fine, probably some of the more practical things or things you'll get in the early game. Why I think Time Dilation Overhaul is so awesome is there's some really niche and specialized pieces of cyberware now, like being able to reflect incoming enemy attacks with a melee weapon if you have time dilation active. This creates some really cool build possibilities and potential. There's one that'll allow you to actually use a blink effect, and when you blink next to an enemy, it'll actually slow time just for that enemy, putting them in a weird isolated state. Or what is my personal favorite is the extreme slow time options, where you could bring time to a near standstill and even extend this with some cyberware mods, and just dance around some of the enemies or get a perfect position. Overall, I love this mod because it hits on both the practicality and the fun side. Like on one hand, it just makes using time dilation in Cyberpunk 2077 a more powerful option. This is now a genuine alternative to quick hacking. With some of these, you can have very powerful builds that are definitely more relevant than quick hacking options. But at the same time, some of these builds are just really fun. Like, yeah, sure, quick hacking is probably a higher ceiling, but being able to blink around and just attack enemies or even reflect the shots of incoming bullets, that's just awesome. And overall, I think it's going to be a mod that'll get you exploring new playstyles while at the same time being shockingly well balanced. But then we also do have Amateur Hackers. This is a pretty simple mod that will let enemies outside of just netrunners quick hack you. So if you run into a group of baddies, there's going to be a pretty decent chance that at least one of them will quick hack you. Now in general, these are going to be weaker than netrunners. They're going to have less available quick hacks on them, a longer upload time, and can't quick hack as often. But I personally like this mod because it feels like getting quick hack in Cyberpunk by default is actually a really specialized or even a somewhat rare thing. It just didn't happen all that often, or at least not often enough for my taste. And with amateur quick hackers, it's going to be far more prevalent that somebody else is hacking you, and really just becomes a staple of most combat encounters, another layer to deal with them. It's nice to have one of those things that's not available only to us, but also a relevant factor for enemies. Although enemies in Cyberpunk 2077 are geniuses, if you attack them from a half-mile away with a silencer, they could somehow pinpoint your exact location and will tell everyone around them where you are. Well, silent silencers and throwing knives will change that. Now if you attack an enemy with a throwing knife or a silencer, they will merely become alert but not immediately know your position. So you can actually stay in stealth and pick off enemies one by one with a silencer equipped, basically how it works in most other video games. And one of the really cool parts about this mod is you can very easily not make this overpowered, but instead just make it a fun and interesting gameplay mechanic. This is because the mod has a ton of configuration options, like a minimum distance required to maintain your stealth. So you can make it so you actually have to be quite far away for a silencer to keep your stealth status. But conversely, you could be right up next to an enemy and a throwing knife will not alert them to you, giving throwing knives a ton of additional utility for close combat stealth builds. And there's even some other settings, like each shot you land on an enemy has a certain % chance of them knowing your position, so there's a low chance they can discover you. And overall, I like how this changes up the stealth build dynamic in Cyberpunk. By default in the game, it almost feels like the way to play stealth is just to avoid enemies whenever possible, but this mod actually gives you some teeth. It gives you the ability to take out a bunch of enemies while still having a largely stealth build. The car Modification Shop most likely finds itself on many people's mod of the year lists, It'll add in a new shop or vendor location in the game that you could drive just about any car into and fully customize it. There's just going to be performance changes, nothing cosmetic, but you could do all kinds of things like overhauling the handling, acceleration, braking, and even top speed, with customization options at all different tiers, so you could even use this right at the start of the game. This mod is just so much fun, mainly because what it does is give you a ton of additional user autonomy over which vehicles are viable. Relatively early on in Cyberpunk, you'll realize, okay, there are fast cars and there are slow cars, the Caliburn being what many people just end up using because it is so ridiculously fast. But with this mod, you could turn something like the Dilation cab into something that handles really well and is really fast in its own right, making it super viable and one of my personal favorite vehicles to use. It's really just fun, messing around with all kinds of different cars you can get. It's also nice that this was a planned feature for Cyberpunk that ended up getting cut, so overall it'll fit in really well in the world. It's a nice piece of cut content being restored. But even outside of that, one of the other odd design decisions CDPR made in Cyberpunk is some of the cyberware just doesn't have the full range of options. Like for example, LxRHyst does not appear in a legendary variant anywhere in the game, and some other things don't have rare variants. Well, Legendary Cyberware Collection will largely fix that, filling out those vendors with more options of higher tier and lower tier cyberware. None of this is really going to be new, but instead now you can get things like Legendary Leg Cyberware that's going to have a greater reduction to fall damage, or the Legendary Nano Shield Cyberware that was previously unavailable, but now when you activate this, it'll slow you down and increase resistances even further. So you can basically use this to become a walking tank for a short while. Or from Victor, you can get Legendary Dense Marrow that will give you even more melee damage, but each hit will cost even more stamina. This mod's really nicely integrated into the game, so all of the new cyberware will be distributed to some of the vendors in the world. And overall, I just think it gives you more build path options. There are more top tier choices overall, as well as actually some lower tier choices. So for certain types of cyberware, you can actually buy into it even earlier in the game because now there's cheaper and weaker alternatives. It's really one of those mods that I think is best to add to the game and forget about. And now as you're going to vendors, sometimes you'll have additional options that you may have not even realized came from this mod. But most of the mods I've been covering thus far are really buffs to our own character, despite the fact that one of the other pretty big issues that you hit by the mid to late game in Cyberpunk is you could pretty quickly just become a god in the game. So another great release from this year that will address this somewhat is Scissors difficulty options. This is going to add in a new menu with several toggleable settings that generally speaking will make Cyberpunk harder. Some of these are going to be pretty straightforward, like enemies no longer appearing on your minimap. You're going to have to use something like ping or actually tag them to keep track of their location, but some can also be pretty impactful, like no shooting delay will change the enemy firing patterns and behavior, allowing them to fire faster and more often. This is one I think you could really feel the impacts of in gameplay. You could have more powerful enemies in the world overall, some higher tier spawns placed throughout, but also things like those mini bosses at organized crime events will now function more like legit mini bosses with a proper health bar, and a bunch of other small changes like no recoil recovery when firing or even immersive damage effects, so you'll get staggered when you get shot. Overall, I think it's a pretty nice lightweight mod that makes some aspects of the game harder, but in a meaningful and interesting way. It's not just making enemies tankier, but enemies feel a bit more capable overall at times, and the interactions you have with enemies will generally be more challenging, but also you could just turn whatever parts of this mod you want on or off. But one of the most obvious entries on this list is Let There Be Flight. This mod probably tops the list as far as just a pure cool factor, as what it's going to do is add in flying cars into Cyberpunk 2077. At any point, simply press a key when driving a car or riding a bike, and jet boosters will pop up and you'll be able to fly up, and away. You can do this just to fly around a bit more quickly or use some of the different flying modes to do things like hover or all kinds of crazy acrobatics. The crazy part about this mod is just how good it is, how well implemented it is into the world. Like adding flying cars seems like a hugely daunting task, but this mod just kind of works. There's custom sounds, a custom HUD when you're in the flying mode, and even a ton of handy options to make it really fun and easy to mess around with this one. And if you're somebody who wants to avoid fast traveling whenever possible, I feel like this is the perfect mod to give you a good fast travel alternative. The newest mod release that made it onto this list is Stock Market and News System. It'll integrate a fully functional stock market into Night City, so you can purchase shares in all of the various corporations and companies companies in the game. The reason this becomes so cool is the company's stock will be influenced by the actions you take either during quests in the game or even just some general actions you can do whenever you're playing Cyberpunk. So you can do something like buy a bunch of Delamain stock, then cause a bunch of accidents leading to more residents of Night City using Delamain and their stock price going up, and you make some money. And I think it's a really cool mod to experience across an entire playthrough. There's some good ways to make some extra eddies, especially before you do a big quest event, but it also does make the world feel a bit more connected, you more integrated in Night City. You do some big thing in Night City as a part of a quest, and the next day you'll wake up to find stock prices affected and some news updates on your phone. The world is really happening all around you, and now you actually get to see the impacts of some of those actions. Drone Companions is another pretty special mod. It's one of the few mods out there that genuinely gives you a different way to play the game. You're going to have to install a new operating system that will unlock the ability to craft and control new drones that will follow you into combat. These drones will come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, from relatively meager flying drones to human-like androids, or even full-on mech support that you can call in. And from there, you could basically play a full support role in Cyberpunk 2077, giving your drones combat targets or even managing them and applying certain bonuses that you can unlock. This is one of my favorite mods because it is one of the few genuine options for a completely unique way to experience the game. You could just go into a drone build path or play style, being able to command a small squad of attackers at every combat encounter, or even driving up to enemy bases with them in your car and wreaking havoc. But then last but certainly not least, what is my favorite mod of the year for Cyberpunk 2077, and probably not all that surprising, we do have vehicle combat. I've covered this mod so many times this year, and if for some reason you're still somebody who's sleeping on it, I think you should change that. This mod's really going to do two things. On one hand, you can now shoot from vehicles at enemies, or really at anything. You have this nice zoom in effect as you're aiming out the window and can do all kinds of crazy things like drive-bys or getting into vehicle-to-vehicle combat. Because yes, other enemies can also shoot out of their vehicle at you. But what I think is the much bigger and more impactful feature of this mod is enemies now have the ability to call for backup, and car chases will happen as a result. When attacking an enemy position, you may notice some of them have this upload icon above their head, and this basically means they are phoning their friends to show up and help put you down. And shortly thereafter, those friends will show up in all kinds of different vehicles, and if you get in a car and try and drive away, they will chase you. You can drag this out too, getting more backup and more stars and even tougher enemies showing up over time. And of course, this is going to apply to police as well. Officers themselves can call for backup, or alternatively, citizens who see you committing crimes can call the police, and you'll have full-on police chases in Cyberpunk 2077. The reason this mod is awesome, and I think everyone should try it out at least once, is the sandbox factor. It makes attacking enemy positions and just really messing around in Night City so much more fun. Some of these police chases can get pretty serious and can last a pretty long time, especially now that there's even smarter AI for the police chases with this mod. But also at other points, you could just hunker down at one location and try and fend off the waves and waves of reinforcements that will show up and fight you, giving you even more justification for that ridiculously overpowered build. I've had countless hours of fun just messing around in Night City with this mod, but even beyond that, it actually is quite impactful in a practical or regular playstyle way. Enemies calling for backup can really be a factor, especially at higher difficulties. It'll really change the dynamic of your positioning, or where enemies are attacking you from, or even how quickly you want to get through clearing a location. And although vehicle combat is my personal mod of the year, ironically enough, it's probably one that may not be around for that much longer because these are features CDPR is adding to the game with patch 1.7. Vehicle combat was shown in the most recent Phantom Liberty trailer, and we know a police rework is also on the way. But until that comes out, this is an incredible mod and you should download it. With that in mind though, these are my top 10 mods for Cyberpunk 2077 for 2022, and there's even a few special honorable mentions in the description if you're looking for a bit more content. It has been a phenomenal year for modding with this game, but I really do think 2023 will even surpass this, as more people get comfortable with the newly released mod tools and what they could do with them, but also just as there's a ton of renewed interest in Cyberpunk as Phantom Liberty eventually does come out. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. What mods do you feel I missed? I did really consider a lot of different mods. I had a list of about 40 mods until narrowing it down to these 10. But let me know in the comments what other mods were really awesome or really cool, or perhaps even some underrated gems you noticed in 2022. With that said, as always again, I thank you all for watching. This will very likely be my last video of the year, so thanks for a great year on YouTube yet again. With that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.